You're listening to the Speaking Tongues podcast. I'm your host, El Charisse. Each week, I sit down to a conversation with multilinguals where we discuss and celebrate language, life, and culture through our own perspectives. Episode 81, Speaking Icelandic with All Things Iceland. Hello, language lovers. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Speaking Tongues, the podcast and conversation with multilinguals. I'm thrilled this week to talk with Jules from All Things Iceland about the Icelandic language and culture. In this episode, Jules talks to us about the grammar of Icelandic. Spoiler alert, it too has cases, and how her journey has been with learning the grammar and the cases of this language. We talk about ways that experiencing setbacks in a language can lead to some teachable moments, and she talks to us about what her experience has been like learning the language in the past 5 years of living in Iceland. Jules gives us an incredible tip for picking up some of the casual vocab and phrases in a language, and we even talk about an English-Icelandic hybrid that Icelanders sometimes use in conversation. We take a quick diversion to learning about humor in Iceland, and Jules tells us some of the things that she's loved and learned since living in the country. Big thank you to Jules for this conversation and for sharing your experience and your journey with Icelandic with all of us. If you enjoyed this episode of Speaking Tongues, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the Speaking Tongues podcast on Apple Podcasts, or like and subscribe on YouTube so that other language lovers like ourselves can find the show. And if you've been a longtime listener of the show or even a recent listener, you can now support the show on buymeacoffee.com. Links to all platforms are in the show notes. Okay, let's chat. Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Tongues. I'm here today with Jules. How are you today, Jules?
I'm well, Elle. How are you?
I'm fantastic. And I'm so happy that you had the time to join me today. And we're going to talk about Iceland and Icelandic. So excited.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited as well.
Yeah. So I like to start each episode with the same question, and that is, what is your first language and which languages have you learned to speak?
My first language is English. And since I was born and raised in New York City, specifically in Brooklyn, and you're from Queens, so you know we're around many different languages. Mm-hmm. So at some point, I was picking up Spanish from my neighbors and a little bit in school, but I've forgotten all of that now. So it's been enough time that I've been away from it. There are times where we go, maybe to a bodega or something if I'm in the neighborhood in Brooklyn, and some of it comes back, but I don't really consider myself a Spanish speaking person. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so I think growing up with those were at least the ones I was most exposed to. And then of course, any slang or sort of Ebonics. Not a lot of people spoke that around me, but just, the whole idea of there is code switching that happens in the Black community. And that was definitely something that was part of my childhood.
And what have you learned to speak since you're living in Iceland?
Hopefully. Yes, Icelandic.
Yeah.
It does happen though, where some people I know of people that are currently still living that have been here for 20 years and they don't speak Icelandic. It's possible. And, I think it's a tough one because everyone's journey is different.
Right.
And I'm sure it can feel very isolating. For a person like myself, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, or maybe I'll go into it now. I don't know, whatever you prefer. But learning Icelandic is way harder than I was anticipating. Mm. And that has not always been something I was willing to talk about because I didn't want to admit it to myself that I was struggling with being consistent with something that was making me annoyed. Mm. It's not so much speaking the language as much as the different grammatical cases and how easy it is to be incorrect about something when you're trying to, decline a verb or a noun. And yeah, so Icelandic, I'm conversational. I'm definitely working on getting better, meaning I'm at intermediate level. A lot of it has come down to my work schedule could be really crazy. and I don't work in Icelandic. I don't have to. So like
Okay.
that is a really interesting thing for me. It's like I can be surrounded by Icelandic people, and speaking it, but a lot of my job sometimes has to do, or did, when in this other ad agency job I had, was dealing with people speaking English and for
Hmm.
English crowds. So it was kind of, it's been an interesting mix for me, I think, in Iceland as well.
Interesting. That I think that's interesting because, well, I'll get into it later. I just want
Yeah.
to, I don't want to jump ahead and,
Okay. It's so
we'll,
easy too, right?
it's so easy when you're just like chatting. So you mentioned a lot of the grammatical things that were difficult about learning Icelandic.
Mhm.
How were you able to get past that? How were you able to manage those grammatical difficulties?
Yeah. Mainly allowing myself, if I really felt stressed, to have a little bit of a break, because that's okay. And also pushing myself outside of my comfort zone. So my husband and I, he's Icelandic, and that's the reason
Okay.
why I ended up coming to Iceland. That happens for a lot of people. Meaning, like, most people are just not up and like, yeah, I'm gonna move to Iceland. Maybe they do now because they have visited, but back in the day, this was not the case. And most people wanted to move here. And it's also not easy for people if you're not from the EU or EEA countries. There's
Hmm.
like a deal that they have. And I think I have to like really go into some of the methods I used, or we used together, was picking like a day. We started off that way, picking a day where we only spoke Icelandic to each other,
Okay.
and then picking a week where we only spoke Icelandic, and then picking a month, right? So it's just this, and getting corrected, of course, is so important, because you can sit and do grammatical exercises, which are crucial. I
Right.
hate them, but they're crucial. I do. I'm just not that. I learned that the hard way. I was like, I really don't like doing this. It's so, excuse me, repetitive, but that's the point, is that you're memorizing these rules and then the exceptions that happen. And that's another thing that makes Icelandic interesting, is that there are a decent amount of exceptions that can feel frustrating, because you think you've got it and then a word looks similar, like a verb looks similar to another one, but it's actually a totally different class or category. And it's like,
Mm.
oh no, that's the one with the exceptions. And it's like, why? It's like, this is so unnecessary. Who wrote this?
Do you have any examples of things that
Hmm.
have tripped you up or things that you find interesting that you had some challenges with?
Yeah, I mean, I would say pronunciation for me has been relatively easy. I wouldn't say it's the easiest, but that's the thing I enjoy the most, because it's mimicking, and I find
Mm.
myself liking to be able to mimic sounds. And just in terms like a verb example, there's a word eiga, af eiga, and that's to have, like to own something. And there's also a word, I guess maybe fara might be to go. So with fara, jeg fer, like I go. But with eiga, I own, it's jeg au. And it's like it's not even, the word goes from being like 4 letters to being 1 letter, right? It's just like, and it's not any of the letters that's in the original form, like the nominative form of the verb. And you're just like, well, why isn't it like jeg fara? I would assume like, I mean, even though it sounds weird to say yay, a god or something like that, but still, like, just the idea that they look really similar or have a
Mhm.
similar ending. And so I thought it would be, and it's like, no, it's not that at all. Like, it's not even close. It's like, okay, so you have to like just know it, or have to memorize it. And then if you're speaking in a certain type of voice,
Okay.
this all changes too. And so just the grammar aspect, I never paid as much attention to grammar, or knew that there could be so much more to grammar, I should say, because we had language arts in school.
Mhm.
But in Icelandic, what this like declining when it's nominative, genitive, those cases, a word can sometimes, depending on what voice you're speaking in, or whatever else, it can have up to 30 different ways that you can change it. Yeah, exactly. That's why your eyes are like, okay, exactly. So that part is,
30?
yeah, it's daunting. Not all words like this, but a lot of them. And it wouldn't be surprising if they have at least like 10 or 15. So you're racking your brain trying to think of like, what do I say? And then translating Icelandic, funny enough, and appropriately, sounds like, at least in my opinion, Old English. So you have this
Ah.
kind of, connection with Shakespeare, so like Yegheite Jules means my name is, but it's really I'm called Jules, right? So it's a very proper sounding,
so majestic,
right? And so it's like, okay. And so and apparently when I was looking this up, Old English and Old Icelandic were mutually intelligible, so these people could talk to each other. Cool. And as people who were living in English-speaking countries, they're of course connecting, interacting with other cultures, language changes and evolves and becomes simpler. In Iceland, this is not what happened. They stayed isolated and the language did not become simpler. It just kept being annoyingly difficult. Yeah. And that was the helpful thing for me, was that I'm not making like, Arabic or Chinese or something like Mandarin. Those are much harder than Icelandic. Let's just be for real. I'm not trying to make it seem it's the hardest language in the world or something, but what's up there with being difficult. And for English speakers, it can be hard. For a German speaker, the only, I've heard this from Germans, what makes it easier is that they're used to these cases already, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they like pick up the language right away or anything.
Okay. Yeah, I noticed that people who speak languages that have cases, they understand the cases, but like if you don't speak a language that has cases, it's really confusing. Like I just remember from Latin, it took me 2 years to even like, what do I need this dative case for, this accusative? And like
you're saying that's the ones I can remember.
And honestly, I didn't get it until it was way too late. I mean, I was doing the work, I was passing the class, but I understood it, but it didn't really like click because, it was just one class. It was 4 years, but it was just this one language I was working with. Did you have any exposure to Icelandic before you moved to Iceland?
I had okay, there's a program called Memrise. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yeah.
And so they had, I think they were one of the first programs I found in order to get just some type of acclimation with what the language looks like and sounds. And it was all over the place though, because Memrise is I think 6 years ago or something. So of course it's evolved since then, but if it is still crowdsourced, I'm not sure.
Okay.
But at the time, people were just uploading, Icelandic from like things that they had recorded. And I don't know any kind of checks that were happening. I'm not saying it was necessarily wrong because I would run it by Gunnar, but I would go on there and learn things like colors. And my first time visiting, yeah, exactly. I felt like a 5-year-old. So my first time visiting Iceland, I remember being at the table for Christmas dinner, or no, New Year's dinner, because I definitely didn't spend Christmas my first time, but I'm like at the table being like, yeah, I've learned how to say blár, which means blue. And everyone's at the table like, oh my God, good job. And I was like, in my head, I was like, this feels good, but I also feel like an idiot, right? So it's so elementary. But I appreciated the fact that they were so excited that I was taking some initiative to learn and can see that this is at least something I would try. So yeah, I did a little bit, but most of the time I feel like I was more concerned with finding jobs in Iceland, because that was my biggest thing before moving here. Was I told Gunnar when he told me he was moving back to Iceland, which was when we first got together, I told him no problem. Like, I'm totally down for going to Iceland. Sign me up. That. Yeah, not knowing a thing, right? Like not really knowing what I was getting myself into. I'd seen, actually, this is so funny. As I jog my memory, of course, I saw Icelandic for the first time 15 or so years ago. So we have a mutual Icelandic friend, Orre, who I went to college with. And he was, I think, the only Icelander on the campus or something. And I met him at a party and we ended up becoming friends. And one time at one of his house parties, I saw this book. It was like a beautiful, ornate looking book. I don't know if this was a purposeful thing or not, but I opened it up and I see all these strange characters, right? And I'm like, what is this? No one can read this. And he's like, no, it's Icelandic. He starts reading and I just start laughing. because in my head, this sounds like it could be just some alien language that someone made up, like some Tolkien something. And so I just start like being, this is ridiculous. Close the book. And I set it aside because in my head, I'm thinking, I'm never going to have to deal with this, right? Like now here I am, right? Just continuously going throughout the day, tackling in my brain the language and continuously trying to get better. So never say never, in terms of things you'll do.
Yeah, maybe that was like an omen of your future to come. It was the first inkling you had to opening up the doors of Iceland for you. So you get to Iceland and you don't speak Icelandic. I want to talk about this later, but I know I'll forget if I don't mention it. So I know that a lot of Icelandic people speak English. And I also know that Iceland is very vigilant about preserving their language as it is. So when you're telling me that you're concerned with finding a job and you're working obviously in Iceland and you're not speaking the language, what is that like? How is that received? Is it encouraged for you to learn? Is it just accepted that you'll conduct business in English and maybe Icelandic will come later? Like, what is that interaction like?
Yeah, you definitely get grace when you first come, meaning people understand that you don't know the language and they are eager to hear you say something if you want to. And at work, I remember, because I worked for an outdoor adventure company in particular as their marketing manager. And that was great because not only did I get to interact, of course, with Icelandic people, but part of my job in the marketing aspect was experiencing the Icelandic nature that we're marketing to people. So the tours and everything else and going on glaciers and highlands and just like super beautiful, amazing things. So I was very grateful for that. And yeah, I mean, it was overwhelming. So the first day I got on the first day I landed in Iceland, right? The very next day after that, I went to work immediately. And I kind of did that on purpose because I'd taken like a break off from my other job and a month that we did some traveling. So I was pretty geared up with like, let's just go, get in there, get to work. And I remember the first meeting we had, which was conducted in Icelandic. It was a company meeting. And I was just sitting there and my eyes were like glossing over. My brain was going numb. Like I just was overwhelmed with how much was being said, how quickly there were figures and, PowerPoint slides. And I didn't know what they were talking about. Right? And it's just like, sounds good. And people are clapping at some point. It's like, okay, I'll clap too, right? I don't know why I'm clapping. So that was, and that's when you start to realize that like, I'm really here in Iceland and this is happening. And I need to learn because I do not like feeling left out like this. And they're not purposely trying to make you feel left out, but like you've mentioned, preserving language is really important. This is an Icelandic company. The majority of people that work there are Icelandic, and it makes sense that this is what happens. At the same time, they eventually had some rules where they would have a separate meeting. It was basically a summary of what happened in the meeting in Icelandic and English. So the meeting could be an hour. The English one is like 10 minutes, right? So it's like,
lucky you.
but then you're spending an hour and 10 minutes. I still have to sit through the Icelandic.
Oh, well, that's not fun.
Yeah, exactly. So my brain's already fried. And then you're like, I'm not getting everything that was said, obviously, because so much more was in an hour. 50 minutes is just, you mean to tell me nothing else was important that you said in the other 50 minutes? So yeah, I think that aspect in general and going like to lunch with each other and stuff like that. So there was a lot of encouragement. There was never any pressure from anyone at that job who told me like, you better learn within this time period. I've heard people who they were given like, you have 6 months and they were only going to like conduct any communication with you in Icelandic. And I was like, that's not happened to me. I've worked in 2 different places here. I remember having good conversations with the CEO who was like, yeah, we totally encourage you to do it, learn. It's like, I work all the time. Like I work all the time past 9 to 5.
Mm.
Okay. When do I have time to go learn Icelandic?
Right.
And I did my first job, I had more time. So I would go to classes in the evening. So I'd be at work from like 8 to 4. Then I go to class from 5 to 7:30. And then I'd go home and smash my head in the pillow and try my best to rejuvenate. And it wasn't working. And actually I did this, I think, for a good 6 to 8 weeks.
Mm.
And I felt like I was losing my mind because it was 3 days a week and I had to stop. I took a break. I took a lengthy break actually. And it was my first year. I think I started in June and it was in September I started doing the classes. And yeah, it's just like, when I think about it now, it might have even been better to go to university because it is more structured. It's like a different thing. And this was just more like a language school that does their own thing.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed as I got to understand more, but the process of understanding more was not just I can cram stuff into my head and it's just going to be instant recall. There was a lot of moments where I felt really down about myself. I was critiquing myself. I said that, after 3 years of being here, if I'm not fully fluent, even though I was not only focusing on learning Icelandic and didn't have as much time as I would have liked, then I was failing, right? And I remember the third year came around and I ignored it. Like I knew it was there, but this is in the back of my mind, right? And that's when I had a conversation with, I think it was the CEO of the company, the ad agency, and I broke down. Not in that conversation, because I was definitely not gonna let him see me cry, because he wasn't saying anything that was cry worthy. It was just more like the flood of this anniversary I had made up, as well as self-criticism had just seeped in so deep because I was doing so well in everything else. And this one thing felt like I was failing. And even though people were saying, no, you're doing really good, your Icelandic's really good, blah, blah, blah. They're just trying to keep me encouraged. And I was like, no, it's not enough. Right? It's like, I never felt like it was enough. I always felt like I was just behind. Yeah.
Wow. So tell me, let me put a positive spin on this so our listeners understand. In this period, as you're learning, and we all have good days and bad days, like that's not, unique to anyone who's learning a language. Like,
Right.
some days stink and some days are, you want to throw a party. What were some of those moments and some of those days when you felt like you want to throw a party because you had a big win with the language? Like, do you remember those moments and how good you felt?
Definitely. I remember making phone calls like to the bank or something and conducting it all in Icelandic. And I was like, what? I just did that. That's amazing. Or going through the challenge of a week in Icelandic and realizing it wasn't that hard. I could do this. Or talking to my mother-in-law. She's super encouraging. Best mother-in-law for me, in my opinion. I've never had another one, but I think she's the best. And just that, and her being like, wow, that was amazing. We just talked the whole time in Icelandic. So yeah, there are definitely days where I should pat myself in the back more. For sure. Have a party, as you say. So I appreciate that to highlight those positives. And I think too, when you speak in Icelandic and someone's like, did you grow up here? Are you like or they're kind of confused because they're like, how do you speak it so well? And it's like, well, if you only knew what I've been through, but thank you, right? It's like,
oh, that's gotta feel great. Tell me about the experience that I guess, sounds like you've thrown a lot of different methods toward learning this language with the apps, with school, and with immersion. And especially as you're working in an office, you're surrounded by, you got this 1 hour meeting and you have all this input. How was the immersion experience? Maybe even outside of the office, since we talked about work quite a bit, but what was the immersion experience like? I guess the language and the culture, if it relates. What was that experience like for you, and how did that help you further along in your journey?
Yeah, it is for sure culture related. I mean, there's so many things in the language that are so deeply embedded in Iceland and how people go about their lives or even see situations. So at home, without pushing it, like making it a big deal in terms of a requirement, it's easy for us to speak in English because that's how our relationship started. And Gunnar lived in the United States for 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
So for him, it's this, and he did his PhD in English, his dissertation. So he's well versed in English and doesn't faze him to speak it. At family parties, this is where it gets fascinating, because at family parties, everyone can speak it, but it makes sense that they would eventually just go and speak Icelandic. Like, it just happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm totally fine with that. But that's the part where the immersion happens, where you're just like, oh, okay, now I'm listening, and you turn into this observer. And the funniest part to me is always when I would be at lunch, say at work, or just somewhere around people speaking Icelandic, and I'm still like grasping what they're saying. And I'm watching them, and like a babies watch people's lips. And so I'm watching their lips and trying to understand. And they usually stop though, because it's kind of uncomfortable for someone to be staring so intently at what you're saying, but they're kind of just watching your lips, to the point they're like, then they try to address you, and you're just like, no, keep talking. I'm listening. So like, it's been really good. And sometimes there's been mishaps in the past, like not as much now, but like in the past, where like someone will say something to me and I misinterpreted what they said, and I just give them an answer, and they're like, no, this is actually what I meant. And I'm like, oh, that's not what I heard. Sorry. Or that's what I hoped you were saying. So I had the answer to it. So yeah, it's I think it's been good. And then sometimes it's been isolating, going to parties or whatever else. And at the same time, I don't regret any of it. And I've learned a lot about myself. I've also learned that I can either destruct myself, like with self-criticism, or I can use these as teachable moments for myself about the things that I could learn, or try my best in those situations, and then just keep on going. So I have like a private teacher now as well too, that's helping me to really like hone in on the things I want to get better at. Grammar, of course.
Your favorite.
And my favorite, yeah. Trying to find ways to make that fun. He does a good job. He shows me like cartoons and different interesting things, because otherwise I'm just like, I don't want to do those. Like I'll show up and I'll do it, of course, but like my brain is like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I think it's really interesting when you mentioned like dinner parties and get-togethers and things like that, and I think it brings like a whole new level of like getting ready to go out when you're immersed in a country, a city where you don't speak the language and you're learning the language. And I don't know about you, but I feel like when it's happened to me, when I've been traveling and I'm, at a table with a couple of people, beyond the pleasantries, I always am just like, why didn't I think to learn? It's still always hindsight. Like, why didn't I think to learn just something to say about even the weather, or, like a current event, or how to compliment somebody's dress or their hair or their shoes, just to like break the ice a little bit. And I feel like you never know the words that you don't know until you need to fill in those words. And I'm always just like, fist shaking to the sky. Like, why didn't I just think of this before? But in the case of Iceland, and I guess maybe not in that particular situation or just in general, because so many people can have conversations in English, have you ever encountered moments where someone's trying to explain something and it's not clicking, and then they switch over to English, or do they keep trying with Icelandic in general?
Often they are quick to switch to English.
Okay.
And I think this is depending on the person, but the majority of people, I feel like it's usually they want to be helpful. And so they don't want to see you struggle because they know the language is hard. And Icelanders will even say, like, we think the language is hard, which I don't think helps. Because it's just like, I know you mean to be like nice, but that sucks, okay? that you grew up learning it all your life and you think also it's hard. So it's pretty off. Like, I'd say on an occurrence where, like, if you're in the supermarket here, for instance, I live in Mosfellsbær, and that is a 20 minute drive from downtown. So if I go to the store or if I go to the pharmacy or doctor's office, what I was trying to think of, then they'll automatically speak to me in Icelandic.
Mm.
And if I'm trying and they see I'm trying, they will try with me. And so I get to a point where I'm like, look, I don't know what this is. So they'll be like, okay, no problem. Right. But downtown, it's almost the opposite because there's so many tourists as well that they will just speak English almost automatically. And some Icelanders get upset with this because they're annoyed. And I remember taking some language classes last summer in August in the Westfield, which is a really remote area. And it was great because in the town, a lot of people, yes, they speak English, but they're so used to speaking Icelandic because it's such a small town of Icelanders. It's a great place to practice. And I was going on a bike ride and there was a guy who was painting his house. And I needed to make sure I was on the right path because I was riding to an abandoned road and you had to cross the highway to get there. And I was kind of like, I don't know if that's right. Like this seems a little dangerous, right?
Dicey.
Right. So I needed to talk to him and I spoke to him in Icelandic and he was very helpful. And I told him that, I'm still learning and whatever else. He's like, no, it's great. And he's like, because I don't really know English. And I was like, oh, interesting. So it was one of those moments that like, if I hadn't been able to conduct this conversation in Icelandic, I wouldn't have gotten anywhere in English because he would have looked at me like, I don't know what you want. Where do you want to go? Right. Like, so yeah, it is fascinating that the rural or more or less outside of the downtown area you get, the better your chances are. And many people have come here and gone to horse farms, for instance, and for 3 months, and they're just immersed hardcore. Farmer doesn't know English, doesn't want to know English, not trying to like accommodate you whatsoever. Learn Icelandic or cry yourself to sleep. And you probably cry yourself to sleep anyway, and then learn Icelandic. So that's one way.
Like we mentioned before about Icelanders.
Mm-hmm. Icelanders, Icelandic people, whichever.
Okay. Icelanders it feels more succinct to say Icelanders. Since we were saying that there is this movement to preserve the Icelandic language and English is unavoidable and things like this. And I guess since you also worked for a marketing agency and you've done social media and things like this, are there any I guess where do you see English encroaching into Icelandic and maybe making like a Icelandish kind of like, does that happen? Are people doing it? Like, what?
Absolutely. It is so weird because you hear someone talking in Icelandic and then it would be like a phrase you would hear in English. Someone would say something and they'd be like, bara. And bara is like, but, and it's like, so bara, not the end of the world. And then it would just keep going on in Icelandic. And I was like, what? Why did you say not the end of the world in English instead of saying it in Icelandic? It's because maybe like they heard this phrase. I'm just giving a really random example because I couldn't think of the one that came to mind. But even like knee socks. I heard someone talking about knee socks and they said it knee socks instead of like, sokkar or something like that. And I was like, that's bizarre, and I was on the radio. And then kids, they use a lot of slang. So chilla is like chill, right? It's just like, you're not even trying at this point. So, whereas you have like slappa off, which is to chill or to like relax. But because chill is a cool word that maybe someone has heard, it finds its way into the vernacular. And it's definitely encroaching to a degree, but I don't know how much it will change things. I'm just more interested to see if the language becomes more simpler to talk. And there are people who are hardcore grammar nerds in Icelandic, and they get very upset when they see things. And it might be because the younger generations are pushing the limits when it comes to like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do it. I'm going to say it this way, Or I've heard people say like, yeah, a lot of Icelanders even say this wrong, even though grammatically this is the way it is, because they've just gotten so accustomed to saying it a certain way.
Yeah. Is it a thing where like with knee socks, for example, is there a word for knee socks? And then like,
not that I know of, meaning like you can explain what the sock is on your knee, right? Like it goes up to your knee. But yeah, I
Okay.
don't know if there's actually a term for knee socks.
I really applaud Icelanders for trying to hold on to their language as much as they can, because outside of Iceland, people don't speak Icelandic. So if they don't hold on to their language and their traditions, and we're all in a digital world right now, like those things
Hmm.
are going to go away. So I think it's really great that that there is these measures there, but I also think it's great that people mix languages, because that's what you do. Like
Yeah,
everybody does it, and I'm glad to hear that it's not this, like, the grammar police are not going to come
yeah.
knocking down your door if you if you mix if you mix
They
words.
might knock down, your Facebook page or something. Who knows? Because, but in the end, it isn't. Yeah, unless you're writing something in the paper or
Mm,
something like that, then it might come across as being, especially for a foreigner, then
mm,
it's like you just don't know.
right.
Whereas for a person who's native, I don't know if they would get it worse,
Hmm.
perhaps. I'm not sure.
Right. Is it something that, do you hear these kind of this mix of language? Do you ever hear it on like TV shows or morning TV or anything like that?
Yeah, I think the news, like the strict news, doesn't do this
Mm-hmm.
because unless there's something that like really doesn't fit in terms of a term, because I've watched different news channels and a lot of the times they stick to it. And I think that's because you have older generations who are usually the ones watching this
Mm.
and you want to make sure you're catering to this audience. And this audience are also usually the ones who are most likely to complain.
Mm.
So if they're not getting it or if it's not feeling like the language is how they grew up talking it, or it's not more business like or doesn't fit within what this medium was supposed to be, then it would be harder. But then you have the gossip mags. Like
Mm.
Dia Vaf is great because for me that's like National Enquirer, it's garbage news. And I love it because it's where I can learn where people
Yeah.
are speaking the language now, like how
Mm.
they're speaking. So of course, they're an editorial, but they talk about all different types of gossip, like Icelandic gossip, gossip from overseas. It's the most random things ever. And I was just like, so I've learned, that's how I'm actually getting better at grammar is reading garbage gossip.
That's an amazing tip. Like, I don't think anyone's ever mentioned that, like, on this show before, just like reading
Okay.
gossip magazines, because oh my God, I have to process this.
Because you're interested in the topic. I mean, if you're like me, I don't watch a lot of shows, but when I go back to the US, for instance, I kind of binge watch like Real Housewives of Atlanta. It's
Yep.
kind of ridiculous. And they don't talk about Real Housewives of Atlanta, but they do have this same type of clickbaits, Daily Mail, ridiculous stuff about celebrities. And I've, in my time, definitely looked at plenty of National Enquirers while online at the supermarket. I never buy them because I really can't support them like this. But it still catches your eye, right? And
Right.
the articles are normally short too,
Hmm.
but they have this, thing where they had this guy, I think, who he was 20 years old dating a woman who was 60. It was just like, it caught my eye. And I was like, it was so stark, the difference between them two, that I just
Hmm.
had to read this article. And I was like, oh, I learned some things here.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
And I guess, if you're interested in pop culture and that kind of stuff, or even if you take a moderate interest in it, it's a good way to understand like the colloquialisms of a language,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe things that you've heard people say, but you don't know how to spell it. Like I hear things like
Yes.
in French and I'm like, okay, but I can imitate you, but I don't really know what I'm saying. But I
Yeah.
guess where else would you see it? Oh my God, this is my new hot tip. I love
Yeah.
it.
Nice. I'm glad that this is helpful. And it's funny, I never thought of it of meaning of sharing because people were always like, what do you do to learn Icelandic? And I'm like, oh, I do this. But yeah, I never thought of talking specifically about gossip mags, but it keeps me interested and why not?
Yeah, I love it. Love it, love it, love it. From what you've observed, how does the Icelandic culture inform the language? And
Mm-hmm.
by that, I think of in the way that New Yorkers, and because we're both New Yorkers, we speak quickly, but we also have a bit of defensiveness in the way that we speak. And I think that's because we're conditioned to not just move quickly, but we're also conditioned to be conscious of our surroundings and to know like what's around us. I know that some cultures are, you know, they're more open, more talkative, and other people are more concise and to the point, and they're not much for small talk and chit chat.
Yeah.
Some cultures are very formal, some are informal, like Australians who, you know, they're just, you know, big balls of love and warmth. Are there anything or is there anything about the culture, maybe even the landscape or the climate in
Mhm.
Iceland, that, you know, it informs the language and how people communicate with one another?
Yeah, definitely. It's really funny when you think about this because Iceland is a harsh place, meaning the landscape is, well, they don't have many trees now. Back in the day, when settlers came and Vikings came, there were a lot of trees, but they were chopped down, even though there's being like a lot more planting happening. But the weather is super harsh, hard to survive here. And people just were really poor for a long time. This is
Mm.
not that long ago. People were living in turf houses, which is like mud on the roof with grass and then it's some stones, you know?
Wow.
So this is leaping from that to modern times, like I mentioned, not that far, and being very direct. So in Icelandic, there's not a please, right? There's like vinsamlegast, but it's not, you don't really say like vinsamlegast verður að, you know, koma með mig or something, or mér. And it's like, no, just come with me.
Mm.
Or like, if I need you to come there, which means you come, right? And of
Right.
course, it's the tone that you use, but it's weird because I often am feeling like I need to be more formal. And so how do I be more formal? And Icelandic, the way that it just comes off is very informal, very direct, and Icelanders can be this way, very laid back people. Þetterettast is the, I would say it's not written anywhere as like the national phrase, but I feel like it is just, you know, unwritten basically at this point and might as well at some point be put down. And in essence, it means everything will work out. So this does sometimes give people the justification to not actually plan ahead. But because things are so based off of whether or not like the weather is going to be good, like you just don't know. It's very volatile weather. So maybe we'll be able to get this chore done today. But if not, the weather keeps us inside, whatever, it'll work out. We just got to keep going, you know. And then it kind of spins into modern times of like, maybe I maxed out all my credit cards. You know, like it's not supposed to mean that really, from what I understand, but it definitely happens and people say it. Or if something happens that is unfortunate, you know, not like a death or anything, but more of like just an unexpected circumstance that you just kind of not wanting to happen, then it's like, you know, just it'll be okay. It'll be fine.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So that definitely works into the culture here and how people often are impulsive. So the lack of planning part, meaning like organizing and going like, we're going to have this strategic plan of things we're going to do. It's like Germans are, you know, very much like this. Whereas Icelandic people are like, nah, I really like this idea right now. That's what we're going to do. Okay. And it's even like, we talked about something else yesterday. It's like, no, but this is what I like now. So we're going to do that. It's like, but we had this whole meeting to make a plan. We're no longer doing that. Okay, fine. There's also a lot of crude jokes.
Oh.
A lot of jokes about, I don't know if I can say penis on your podcast, but
yeah.
So tippi means penis in Icelandic. And to the point where I feel like people just find ways to make jokes about penis, right? And this is men and women. So I was at a photo shoot 2 weeks ago, and this woman somehow, she was saying in Icelandic a joke about tippi, and I just started laughing. I was like, this is an all women thing, right? Like there's not one guy in sight, and she just wants to joke about men genitalia. I don't know why. And it's just, yeah. And then there's like, and this happens at work. Like there are, not to say that's like sexual harassment
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it can definitely border on that if you're talking to a certain person, but it isn't unusual to be at a party with your coworkers and jokes like this come up. And so it's like I mentioned, like very informal and almost like not realizing that, like in the US, you'd be reported to HR. Like there'd be all these things happening to you.
Get packing.
Yeah. Exactly. It's like he talked about his dick, it's just like, it's like, but it was a joke. And yeah.
So I wonder, because I love humor and I don't talk about humor enough, like as it relates to language. But now that you're saying this, I really think that every culture has its kind of like subject of what they find funny, whether it's like scatological or whether it's about sex or genitalia or
death.
Death. Yeah, exactly. So if this is Iceland's thing and their jokes are about penises, are they funny? Are they funny? And I'm saying, like, are they funny or are they goofy? Are they offensive? Are they like, what side of that does it fall onto?
I would say goofy most of the time for me, but that's also because I think the prude in me comes out sometimes. And I am trying to shed that by realizing that, like, this is not where I come from. And sometimes people are just being silly, I've never found it offensive because it didn't come across as trying to be, but it was almost like getting over social awkwardness and saying something really silly.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say childish because sometimes Icelanders do get described as being naive, and I don't believe that they're naive. I think that there is an aspect of social awkwardness sometimes. Not every Icelander is going to be super welcoming, meaning they're friendly to you, but they can be very closed off until they get to know you or kind of get a sense from you.
Yeah.
What's up? And that part can be a little hard. And so maybe breaking the ice for some people or knowing they're going to get a laugh with this in particular is something that's like a go-to. Kind of similar with death too. Icelanders and Finnish people apparently have this in common, where in movies where it's like really dark and messed up, they're laughing at the parts where people were like, that's not funny, and it's just like, why are you laughing at this? This is weird.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an interesting mix. Yeah, that's just how I initially see it. I don't know if that is the whole story, but yeah, those things seem to get thrown around in circles of people who are maybe don't know each other that well, and they're just like, tippe, and then all of a sudden everyone's just laughing.
Is it the kind of joke that you'd hear on, and I always go back to pop culture, but is it a kind of joke that you'd hear maybe on a variety show, late night talk show, something like that? Does it get past, like, I don't know if there is censorship or what kind there is, but can you hear these things on TV? Not the news, but like any other type of show.
Yes, you definitely can. I mean, it's called Áramótaskaupið, which is the yearly comedy show or yearly roundup show. And in essence, every New Year's this happens, where there is a SNL-like show where they do like satire based off of like the biggest news stories or biggest events of the year. And they, in essence, it's just like to laugh, but also a reminder that like this weird crap happened this year or something. So yeah, definitely. And they are not shy. I mean, there was one time where it's like a fireworks thing, because they sell fireworks. The search and rescue team, this is also in itself a weird joke, in my opinion. The search and rescue team sells fireworks that people can blow off. Some of them are like little rockets. But if you were to like hurt yourself, who's going to come and help you, right? So it's like, this makes sense. It's like, it's kind of encouraging people to do dangerous things, and you're part of helping. So like, but that's how they make money, because they're a volunteer organization. So in my opinion, like when I heard these things, I was like, I'm joking about like, what is this? This is super bizarre. But they had a skit about the search and rescue team, and they had the names of and this is a family event that everyone's watching. So they have the names of some of the fireworks as being like BDSM related. Right. So they're like turning around and like he's like wearing like a corset, and like it's they just kind of went for it. And children are watching this, like everybody's watching this, and everyone's just like, that's hilarious. I was like, what? This would not be okay. Like, Janet Jackson boob showing by mistake on
Right.
and what is a halftime show.
Mm-hmm.
Ruin like derails her career, and like this they're doing like BDSM jokes on like the family event. So like, yeah. So it doesn't know, it's very relaxed in regards to those things too. And I think a lot of Icelanders have had to learn, like even taking pictures, because they're so used to like taking pictures of their kids, and maybe the kids are naked out on the lake or something. And it's like posting on Facebook, and it's like, no.
Oh
You can't do
no.
that. You can't do that. Right? You're like, but it's my child. It's like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Some authority is going to be calling you. So you have to take it down. I mean, it's been a while since that, but like this kind of, like, they're not taking it that serious, right? Because this is a normal thing. Why are we being so judgmental of people's nudity? And when you come to a pool in Iceland, if there's a facility, you have to take a shower naked. So they're separated by genders, but you have to take a shower naked with all the other women. So you're all in just one big, room that has different shower heads, and you just undress and you go shower naked. And there are, in some bigger pools, attendants who watch to make sure that everyone is soaping up and whatever else, because they want to keep the pools clean. And I know many friends who've had issues with this, and they're like, we have to take off, I can't just do my bathing suit. And it's like, no, they will. If you go in your bathing suit, they would say, excuse me, you have to take your bathing suit off. Like, it was just like, people will not be shy about actually stopping you.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot, I think, in the culture and in the language. You hear things, like I mentioned, the tataratas part, that it's, or, I don't know, I'm trying to think about other things, but it's very direct, or even the translations of words are very direct too. So the infamous Eyja Fjallajökull, I feel like that's a fun one, because Eyja means island, Fjalla means mountain, and Jökull means glacier. So the island, mountain, glacier, that's literally what it means, right? It's just like, I'm describing what this thing is very plainly, and you can't mistake it, right? So a lot of Icelandic words even translate this way. It's like to the point.
So I love your YouTube channel, and all the that's how I found you, and all the things that you, obviously it's called All Things Iceland. And before I even go any further, I realized, just because I was so excited to talk to you, that I didn't situate our listeners. How long has it been that you've been living in Iceland?
Since 2016, so a little over 5 years now.
Okay, 5 years. So I hope everyone has, bared with us. And how long have you been doing the channel?
Since 2018. This is my podcast started in 2018, I think in June. And then I put out a video on YouTube in October 2018, but I was not like dedicated to YouTube because, first of all, I was afraid of it.
Scary.
It's just like, it is scary. And people are not nice. There's so many trolls. There's so many nice people. Let's be fair. Like, the majority are nice people. I'm very grateful. You just sometimes get really jarred when you get those comments that are just don't make any sense and are not based off of any logic. They might not even watch the video. They just assume things about you, which is always fun. And so so the audio part has been consistent since 2018, and I've only consistently been doing YouTube since July of 2020.
Okay.
Yeah. So in this time frame of the last year, my channel grew a ton, because I actually was putting more effort into it and learning and just understanding how to speak to people on YouTube.
Once you get comfortable, it gets easier to keep producing too.
Yeah. And for me, it's like, while I do want people to request things, a lot of the times the video ideas are just what I feel good about. So it's like something I observed or something I realized that people might not understand. So let me just relate this because I have some insight about it.
Right. When you moved to Iceland, you've been there for 5 years, as you said. What are some things that, when you first started becoming acquainted with the culture, what are some things that surprised you? What are some things that took you a while to get used to, and you are used to them now? And what are some things that you've grown to love and feel like, I can't live without this? Or when you're away from Iceland, like you miss it and you can't wait to come home to it?
Yeah, I'll go backwards. So I'll start with the last one. can't, I wouldn't say can't live it out, but it's very hard when you have to change it. And that's the water. Oh my gosh, the water out of the tap is just amazing. It's so good. It's fresh, it's delicious. It's not filled with chemicals and chloride and fluoride and whatever. It's so good. And the nature, oh man. So the nature is amazing. And of course the water and nature, just they go hand in hand. So those two things I would say have been transformative for me in Iceland, because you know, I go back to New York, I'm like, ooh, the water tastes weird. Like, it's not horrible, but I need a filter. Like this is not going to do it for me. So, and filtered water it's not even enough. It's not as good. So yeah, this is definitely having some of the best water in the world. It makes it hard to go to drink other things. And things that surprised me, I'm skipping again, it's just whatever.
It's okay.
So when I first got here, I definitely had to get used to, well, I heard about it before, but I didn't know that people were going to do it. And that was leaving their kids outside in carriages to sleep. And this is still, it's not something I'm used to. I'm not going to lie. Meaning, like, obviously I know that it happens, but I don't have a child. And I thought to myself, like, if I had a child, would I do this? I also said to myself, would I eat licorice? And I said, no. And now I do it. So, like, I don't know if I have a kid, because someone told me, they were like, if you're tired, you will try it because it works wonders. And I was like, okay. So they bundled the kid up, put him in a carriage. They might put them on the balcony, obviously not on a really windy day or anything, but they put them on the balcony. Or like, if you're in a coffee shop, you would leave your kid outside the coffee shop right next to the door or something on the street, because you're not worried about anybody kidnapping your child. So this thing, when I first encountered it, I was just so afraid that someone was going to kidnap the child, because we're from New York, right? Like, this is, you know, underground child selling. I don't know, like whatever happens to children, abductions. Like, it was just really horrible. And you always hear about, like, your parents, and as you mentioned before, like, you always watch your back, you're very alert. Like, this is just a part of city life in New York. It's bigger cities. So I think that part was really bizarre to me. And speaking on the inhale, Icelanders do that. And that was not something I was used to either. So the word, I always use the word yow because it's really dramatic. So, like, talking like that, that's something people do. And they can do full sentences while inhaling.
Really?
Yes. Ganesh does it a lot. And I've started to do it because it's just, I hear it so often that it's just become a part of me. And I'm like, who am I? What am I doing? Hiking was not something I really did before. And I've also, like, picked that up. So yeah, there are a couple of things. And I think tetaratas to a degree, meaning I can be sometimes very, like, organized and wanting things to be this certain way. And it's like, no, I really don't have any control of the situation. I've done what I can. So tetaratas. And just keep it moving.
That's a good philosophy to have in life, I think. Just know that it'll work out. Just really quickly, you know, being a Black woman in Iceland, what has your experience been like, you know, in the years that you've been there?
It has transformed a lot. It's evolved because my understanding of the culture and more insights, you know, it's just happened naturally. But also All Things Iceland, one of the biggest reasons why I started it was because I wasn't seeing information or hearing things that I wanted to hear. And being Black here, so I made a YouTube video about it because I really wanted to share this perspective. And of course, this is being Black, meaning as a foreign national being Black. This is not the people who are mixed heritage here, or even might have come at an early age to Iceland and grew up, whatever. It's totally different. And there are great resources and places where you can learn that. People have really opened up about talking about it due to George Floyd's murder and the Black Lives Matter movement. This has really sparked a lot of conversations. And when I first got here, I had rose-colored glasses on, for sure, because my life was very much, and it probably is still, like, very much in a bubble, right? Like, I was at a job where people were super nice. I, you know, did not have to start my life over. I was basically in I wouldn't say prestigious position, but, like, when you come in kind of in a managerial type of role into a country where, you know, and you're bringing some expertise to it, you get a different level of respect. And you and also being from New York City, there's a lot of bias there, meaning Icelanders really respect and like people from New York. I found, I don't know about the rest of the US, can't speak for it, but it just, so it's like people always go like, wow, you're from New York. Why would you ever leave New York?
Right.
Everything is there. And it's like, yeah, literally everything is there packed in. So like, that's why you leave New York. But so I think like I was fortunate, but also I wouldn't say disadvantaged, but just like lacking in hearing some of these things. And a lot of people too were not aware of what was happening. I did an interview with a woman, All Things Iceland, who's a friend of mine. I call her my Instagram cousin, so we talk a lot there. And her mom is a white Icelandic woman, and her dad is a Black American man. And she didn't grow up with her father, so she just kind of had to navigate. And for her, it was like, no big deal. I mean, there was one incident where a kid called her an N-word when they were really little, and her mom was furious about it, but she just kind of brushed it off like no big deal. But after people started sharing their experiences from last summer, like due to last summer, she also opened up and realized there were a lot of things that she had kind of pushed aside and wasn't aware that this was discrimination or microaggressions or whatever, you know? And so I thought that was really interesting. And so she's become an advocate and using her platform, especially because she's from theater and advocating on like more diversity in theater and like all these places. It's like, wow, you know, it's amazing what can happen and how much your narrative can change when you get a chance to hear other people's stories. Sometimes the stories are worse than yours, but it still clicks something with you that you're like, whoa, okay, I've been totally ignoring this or not aware of this.
Right.
So yeah. And then I also did this interview with this woman, Dr. Christine Lofsdottir, and that's when my rose-colored glasses changed shade for sure. So she is a professor, and she has been writing about racism, the concept of whiteness, and Nordic exceptionalism in Iceland for like the last decade or so. And specifically around like different events that come up around these topics and how Icelanders, because they were a colony of Denmark, positioned themselves with whiteness and like, you know, proximity to Europe to distance themselves from Greenlanders, for instance, who were also a colony of Denmark, but they were considered savages. So they didn't want to be considered savages.
Interesting.
So it's just like, yeah, all these dynamics that go into play that create a culture and also create the narrative of, you know, race and literally a concept, you know, that we have absorbed, embodied, and often like tried to rebel against. And yet, you know, the system itself is oppressive when it comes to minorities normally. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey for me because I also think about for myself what this does mean and what do I want to contribute to this conversation, and also how can I help to elevate other voices in this conversation, because it isn't about just me. Like I'm learning, and that's the whole point, is to learn and share.
Yeah,
and that's what All Things Iceland was created for.
Culture is meant to be shared.
Exactly.
I truly believe that. For anyone who wants to check out your content or maybe get in touch or talk more about Iceland or hear more about Iceland from your perspective, how can we get in touch with you?
Sure, there are a decent amount of ways. So I'm All Things Iceland on YouTube, and there I think also like you have my email address, and on Instagram I'm All Things Iceland. I don't really use Twitter, but I have a Twitter, you know, Jules Chambers. If you really want to go there, I will try my best to check it, but I don't that often. And then on Facebook, I'm also All Things Iceland. So a few different platforms that I am juggling, and in allthingsiceland.com is where you can find podcast episodes, or Spotify, Google Play, anywhere where you listen to podcasts.
Great. I will add all of your links into the show notes so that people who are listening to this conversation can click and find your platforms right away.
Thank you.
Yeah. I've really enjoyed this conversation so much. I've enjoyed talking with you and getting to know more about your journey with the language, and as you're moving through Iceland and discovering the culture and sharing all of that culture with us. Thank you so much for this conversation.
My absolute pleasure. And thank you for inviting me on. It was an honor to chat with you about all these things in life. And also just, you know, I think your questions are also great as well, because it brought out a lot of things in me that I don't normally talk about. So that was kind of helpful as well. So thank you.
Cool. I like to end each episode on the same question. And that is, do you have any jokes, tongue twisters, Cool slang words,
Mhm.
idioms, words of wisdom, or words of advice in Icelandic to share.
So there's a one that's word of advice. I think it's interesting, or it's at least like a warning.
Okay.
So it's blindur bóklaus maður. So blind is the bookless man. And in essence, it's like if you're not reading, because Iceland has a high literacy rate, and I think 1 in 12 Icelanders become an author at some point in their life. They publish a book.
Cool.
So this is very much something that is in high regard to read and to be a learned, an educated individual. So I think that's just really fascinating to me. This wisdom of like, make sure you read, because otherwise you're blind. You're basically going in the world without being able to maybe relate to somebody,
Right.
or have the knowledge to understand what they're talking about, or whatever else. So I like that a lot. Some I can't remember the phrase, actually. I'll go to another one just because I don't want to mess the phrase up. But this is a great word, I think, because it's very apt for Iceland, or places where it might be that it looks really beautiful outside, but it doesn't feel beautiful. And that is gluggaveður. So glugga means window, and veður means weather. And it literally means window weather. And that's because right now I'm looking out the window, for instance, and it looks nice. But when I go outside, it's going to be a lot cooler, or maybe it might be really chilly. So it looks beautiful outside. Like you would love to be out. But you go and you're like, oh my God, it's horrible. It sucks. Right? It's just like the weather, it's really cold. And it's not that I think it's that cold, but it can be cold enough where you're just like, nope, staying inside. So they have this, word for window weather, where it's just nice to stay in your house and look out the window at the weather rather than actually being in it.
Can you teach it to me? It's glugga.
It's glugga.
Glugga.
Veður. Yeah, like with a V. Veður.
Glugga.
And it's a TH. Yeah, so veður. Yeah.
I love that phrase.
Gluggaveður.
Yeah. Thank you so
I'll do
much.
one more.
Sure.
This was like voted most beautiful word in Iceland one year. Mm-hmm. And that's ljós móðir. So ljós means light, and móðir means mother. And it explains a midwife.
Ljós móðir.
Móðir, yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah, and so it's beautiful because you think about like bringing like the baby into the light mother. It is a beautiful idea.
That is.
Yeah. So I like that one a lot too.
Very powerful. Thanks for sharing those.
My pleasure.
And thanks for teaching me, because I always like to try at the end of the episodes just to put myself in the spot of a learner. Thank you once again for this conversation. And before I let you go, I know you have to run, but in this situation when we've been talking for some time and having some laughs and, nice conversation in Iceland, in Icelandic, what would be the best way to say goodbye?
I mean, it's pretty simple, honestly. It's just bless, or bless. Like if you're saying just goodbye for the night. Yeah. Just that. Or if you want to say, like if you're at someone's house and you had a good time, you can say like takk fyrir mig, like thank you. Just to kind of let them know that you're satisfied with what they did. And then bless to say goodbye. But one kind of unique term that I was not used to, but I really like now, is when you see the person again. So if they invited you over to their house and the next day, so it's not like immediately after, but the next day at work, you say takk fyrir síðast. And that means thanks for the last time. And in essence, it's like, it's letting them know that like I really enjoyed that time, that literal last time we were together. And I just want to let you know that. So takk fyrir síðast. And it's really nice. And people like super enjoy hearing that. And of course, saying it to each other.
I love it. Yeah. Well, bless, Jules. Thank you again.
Bless, Elle.
And
I'll
be talking to you soon. Bye.
Yes. Bye.